let's now go into that case of, okay, let's go with the one that you find mold. You got molds, it goes red on you. You have the smell there and everything. What is someone's next step? Because as I know, most remediation is about just cutting it out, spraying it with chemicals, airing it out for a little bit and leaving, saying you're remediated, when in truth, what was causing the dampness?
Exactly. So remediation, the root word is remedy. And so I love etymology, right? If you dig into words, they're so self-revealing. So what do we need to remedy here? Well, we need to remedy the water problem. So remediation always begins with fixing the water, always. And if you don't, then don't bother, really, because 24 to 48 hours is how long you've got from the time something gets wet and it becomes moldy. So if you have a water damage event or a leak or any sort of excess dampness, including high humidity, 24 to 48 hours is the zone in which you need to take action, according to the EPA. The industry standard, which is called the IICRC S520, IICRC is the organization, the S520 is the document. They state that at 72 hours, something that's gotten wet, especially something that's porous and absorptive. So anything like carpet padding, sheetrock, of course, is the number one mold food. Anything upholstered. These things at 72 hours of dampness, not properly dried, need to be treated as if they're moldy, whether they're moldy or not, whether they're visibly moldy or not. So fixing the water problem is first, and then you have to set up environmental controls around. So you asked me what's someone's first action? Find the water problem, and then determine from there, because the water problem, the mold will tell you how to find the water. This is the thing about mold, is that everyone thinks it's the enemy. The mold gives you all the clues you need. It gives you the musty smell, which is the alarm bell. And then if you track that back and you can find where the source of the moisture is and fix it, and there's a whole trail because you got growth. And then you need to address that. Now, if that's beyond the scope of your experience and capabilities, that's when you involve a professional, right? So in other words, diagnosing the moisture problem, if that's beyond your scope and experience, then you need to bring in a professional, unfortunately. And that's where it's expensive. And that's where it's also difficult to find somebody who's qualified, because the number one rule is no conflicts of interest, right? Number two rule is no ERMI, because it lends itself to conflicts of interest, and also an endless rabbit hole of huge expenses. Anyone who's pushing that, by the way, really pushing that, had better have some really good justification. By the way, I can share with you a link to an article we just wrote about called "The Truth About ERMI," which was a collaboration between some of the brightest science minds that I know, and humbly us. And so I would love to share that with you so that you can share that with your audience, because it's a real problem. It causes a lot of panic and fear, that test. It really does. People, it's so much confusion and so much heartache. So figuring out where the water problem is, fixing that, and then determining the extent of the mold. And then the remediation, the physical part of the remediation is removing the building materials that cannot be cleaned. And again, this is under special control. So you'll establish, almost like ET, right? You're going to tent off the area, the work area, so the dust you create in that work area stays in that work area. You're going to isolate HVAC, in other words, block your vents. You're going to ventilate the space with what they call negative air pressure. So you're going to blow air out of the window or out of any penetration you can to create a sort of a suction within that workspace, so that anything you produce in the space stays in the space. And then you remove these building materials: carpet padding, sheetrock, insulation, ceiling tiles, anything upholstered and absorptive that was wet and stayed wet too long. And then there's a microfine cleaning. And that cleaning utilizes HEPA-filtered vacuum cleaners and damp wipes. Now, you'll notice that I didn't say anything about spraying, anything about fogging, anything about killing, because that is counter to actual remediation. In the standard, they specifically advocate against using chemicals unless there was concern about a bacterial issue. So in other words, if the source of water was sewage or river water or ocean water, which is loaded with nutrients, then you need to sanitize it. But they're not saying to kill the mold. Because you don't need to kill the mold. Killing the mold doesn't actually help. Actually, what you've just done, if you come in and start spraying stuff, is you've added a chemical that you can't get back out of the house. Whereas you can get the mold out, but you've added a chemical that you cannot remove. You're also, in many cases, using that chemical in lieu of cleaning, because contractors like to do less work and get paid more money. So they like chemicals because that's less work, more money. And they're leaving behind dead mold. Well, the purpose of mold remediation is to reduce the fungal load to an acceptable level, which means you have to clean it out. You have to remove it. Mold remediation is about cleaning and removal. It's not about killing. And also, when you use chemicals to kill mold, as with bacteria, as you're seeing in hospitals with resistant organisms like MRSA and C. diff and stuff like that, when you're widespread killing stuff, what happens is you leave behind the really strong stuff. And this is called competitive release, where you kill off all the would-be competitors that would normally keep that stuff in check in a biodiverse environment where you've got lots of different microbes competing for the resources that are there. Instead, you kill them all off and you leave the dead mold behind, and the really tough ones come out and eat the dead mold. Dead mold loves to eat mold. And so the really tough one comes out and eats the rest of the stuff. And by the way, if you've used bleach, it looks clean, but it's not. And by the way, if you use bleach, it's really funny. The bleach evaporates, leaving behind what? Water, right? So bleach is primarily water, 97% water. And so you get this hallucination that you've cleaned because it smells clean and because it looks clean, but you're actually leaving behind dead mold and water. You just added water to a water problem. And so all that stuff is very counterintuitive, and it runs right in the face of all the wives' tales and the stuff that we've considered to be sort of fact. A bucket of bleach and some paint, and you're good to go. Not true. And so it's difficult for the consumer because there's not a lot they can do on their own unless the problem is very small, which again goes back to acting quickly, because at 24 to 48 hours, if something gets wet, you can rip it out yourself as long as there's not a pre-existing mold problem there. And you can dry it out. But at 72 hours, and by the way, insurance will cover most water damage. Insurance, if you have a water damage issue, most insurance, and even if you've got a landlord, that will be covered. If you act quickly, that's like free or cheap. At the 72-hour mark, mold remediators have to come in. These guys come in moon suits. They've got different insurance. They've got different trucks. They've got different equipment. They've got different expenses, and your cost just went 10x. And by the way, insurance doesn't cover it. That's the big kicker, right? Now it's a cash pay. So you have 3 days of opportunity to take advantage of insurance and a DIY solution. At the 72-hour mark, you are now in cash land, and you're now in professional land, and the insurance companies will turn their back on you. And in fact, if you file a claim, they'll drop you on renewal if you do it twice. So it's a real problem. So this is my message, right? If you see something, smell something, or feel something, do something, and do it quickly, because you have 2 to 3 days maximum.